to begin.
You're listening to Magrito Podcast Network, celebrating the culture of Chicanos and Latinos one story and voice at a time. Listen to more Magrito Podcast Network shows over at magrito.net.
You're listening to KQBHLP, Los Angeles, California, 101.5 FM, a community service of Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory, broadcasting live on your FM dial and streaming on kqbhla.com. You're listening to The Social Primate with your host, Eddie Aguirre. And today we have the one and only Yesika Salgado.
Hello, hola.
Hey, Yesika, thank you so much for making the time to come out here and do the show with me.
Of course. I mean, you know, I'm in Silver Lake. It's just one straight shot. You come down Sunset, it becomes Cesar Chavez, and eventually you get here.
Well, Yesika, again, thank you so much for making the time. I'm sure by this time, most people listening to this, they know who you are. You know, I've had the opportunity, I was just mentioning to you off air, this was, my first time that I actually get to physically talk to you in studio. I met you, or I saw you perform at Art Space HP a month or two ago.
Yeah, it's been I think 3 months.
Yeah.
It goes by fast.
It went fast. And I was telling you, I met you, I saw you there perform, and I had the intentions of reaching out, after the show, because I mentioned I'm so shy sometimes. I don't even like approaching people, especially in those kind of events where there's so many connections going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I came out of that. I think you ended that thing. I might be just paraphrasing here, but I think you ended the whole thing about if you wanted to kind of continue seeing yourself grow as a creative or just whatever you're doing, you gotta keep continuing to put yourself out there.
Oh yeah, I don't know I don't always go super inspirational at the end or motivational speaker, but there was something about that room and everybody just seemed so hungry just the cause already had everybody there with a specific intention, right? Because it was a pro-Palestine event, but even the audience seeing so many faces that look like us, right? And I try as much as I can to remind folks that telling our stories is like our ancestral right. And if we want to share stories, there's always many avenues to do that now. Obviously, I don't try to lie to people to say that everybody can monetize their work, but I think that everybody has the right to be heard and to share it and put it out there, whether it's in open mics or social media or whatever makes sense to you.
And it's cool because, when individuals from, I'm basically grew up in Southeast LA. So seeing individuals who've kind of at this point become, you're an author for my understanding, 3 books that you've already done.
Yes.
Working on the 4th one.
Three books with a publisher, Corazón, Tesoro, and Hermosa. And before that, I had 3 zines that I published myself. And those were the Luna Poems, Rose, and Sentimental Boss. And those are my girls. And so, yeah, and I haven't put something out in a minute, but I'm working on the 4th book. It'll be out eventually.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it's anticipated because it's been, 3 years or something? The last one?
My last book was in 2018, but my 3 books, Corazón, Tesoro, and Hermosa, came out consecutively within, for 3 falls in a row. I had books coming out, so I spoiled my readers.
Yeah.
And now I get the question that all readers get trauma from, where it's when is the next project?
The pressure I can imagine is immense.
It's just the desire to show your growth as a writer because you don't want to write the same book again. And so it's figuring out okay, so I personally, for me, I write about myself and my family and my life and my culture and my body and my relationships. And so it's how can I keep telling Yesika's story and still make it relatable to my readers, but also say something different, something new. And so my new book is called Mentirosa, and it's about the things that we do when we're lonely or when we're told that we don't own our bodies. And it's, I can only write from the perspective of a woman. So it's what happens to women when that happens to us.
And I'm assuming at this point, you writing this book or in the process of writing it, it's been, like you said, a combination of these different growths that you've had in the last, let's just say 10 years or so, right? Or not 10 years. You started writing the book in 2017.
So I've been a writer my entire life. And my first book was published in 2017. 17, 18, 19 was my book. So from 2018, I had just put the book out and I had my agents reached out to me wanting to sign me. And then I was just I just finished the book. I haven't even thought of another, because with my other books, the minute with Corazón, when I turned it in, I told my publisher, Daniel from Not a Cult, I was all right, let's do the next one. But it's because I had been writing so many years. I had stacks of poems. I was ready to go. But by the time that Hermosa was out, my stack was kind of depleted. So a friend of mine, I was having like an existential crisis. And she told me, she goes, Yesika, you got to live a little to write a little.
Mm-hmm.
So the pandemic happened. And then after that, I've just told myself that I got to live a little to see things in a different way and to like catch up to my growth so that I'm not writing anymore. I'm no longer writing as a writer that's trying to establish herself. Now I get the freedom to just tell my story.
Yeah.
And so that's it takes a little bit of a change in gears, but we're working on it.
And how did you narrow it down to kind of to these themes, and of like finding yourself based on how like maybe the public can perceive you or just how you perceive yourself? Like, how did you end up at that point? So
with Corazón, when I've always been a big writer of love, romance, heartbreak. Oh, I love writing a poem that hurts, And so when it came to my first project, my publisher had looked at my last scene, which was sentimental. And it had a lot of poems about being heartbroken, but also being empowered and the duality of that and how it's not just straightforward. And they said if I could turn that into a full-length book, that's kind of what they were interested in. And I took that feedback and I went back and Corazón isn't exactly that, but it's that. It's about the yearning for love, finding love, losing it, and then finding yourself on the other end of it. And it was just a journey that's really natural to me. And it was where I was at in 2017, where I had come through like a huge growth. And then Tesoro was, I was being a big girl and trying to be really brave. And I was tackling like all the trauma. I'm like, I'm going to interview my family and I'm going to write this complex thing. It didn't end up happening that way. It was still... it still deals with the trauma of machismo in families and how that lingers and it affects you as you become a woman in society. And then Hermosa was genuinely the book where I said, F it all, and I wrote. I couldn't finish it. And my friend Gaby Rivera, who's also a writer, she wrote Juliet Takes a Breath, and she wrote for Marvel for the America Chavez.
Nice.
Life flex. But I love Gabby, and she was in town for something, and she was like, you know what, I'm here for work, so let's work on your book. She was like, let's figure it out. And she said, this Yesika right here with the nails and the lipstick and this boss girl, I don't see her in your work yet, and as a fan I want to see present Yesika in your work. And so I went back with Hermosa, and Hermosa became a book for myself, selfishly for myself. Nice. There was no like outright theme or chapters or like any like not gimmicks, but my other books had like a lot of Easter eggs hidden in them and things like that. Yeah. My mentor was really big on like putting Easter eggs on things, and I ran with it. If you have Tesoro, like there's a secret message in Tesoro. But anyway, in Hermosa, it was the book that I was trying to capture the woman that I was in 2019. Little did I know that then the pandemic, it came out in September, and then the pandemic happened in March. And so the touring for that was different. And it was, but it won an award. It won the International Latino Book Award in Poetry.
Hell yeah.
So it was a nod. It was, you're not always seeking validation, but sometimes it's nice when you get it, when you're like, you know what, forget all this. I'm going to do what I want. And then they're like, okay, this is the one that gets something. And then I'm like, all right, well, I need to trust my instincts. And Gabby more often.
She's here like pumping her fist.
Yeah, no, Gabby's so cool. She's badass, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. So obviously pandemic came, and that was like for everybody, it was like a hit, like in all sorts of ways. So I'm assuming at this point you had the ability to, or the time, if anything, just to do self-reflection on yourself. You know what? I live at home with my mother, and at the time she moved out recently, but my sister lived with us, and my other sister lives a mile away from us, and she had to go to work, and so we had her kids with us when there was no school. So in a little house, a little tiny 2-bedroom house, there was all these people, so there was nowhere to run away to. There was no coffee shops for me to go sit in. There was no co-working spaces for me to go. There was no shows. Everything had to be in my house. Yeah, I was performing in my mom's room, on Zoom, and the walls closed in on me a little bit too tight. I didn't realize how I always kept everything in compartments. And the pandemic really made me look at my life as one whole unit and kind of work through that, and also work through like my own things like depression and anxiety and
a lot of those things. But I had a lot of fun online during the pandemic too.
Yeah.
I was up to some nonsense online.
It's funny because right before the show, we were talking about like how, you look up to certain authors or writers and you kind of see them as like these mythical creatures.
Yes.
And to people listening to this or people who've been following you, you are that mythical creature as well. But you're speaking truths about how you have to deal with like the depression, like the anxiety, like all these things that really at the end of the day, if we're catch ourselves by ourselves, we're like, get these feelings of like this are kind of creeping in. And you realize, like once you look at this mythical creature and how vulnerable it could be, it kind of gives you like this self-empowering, like, I don't know, energy where you're like, you know what, they're going through it. I know that I'm going to get through this as well.
Yeah, I mean, like we could all fake the funk and pretend that we got it all figured out and polished, but that's not interesting.
Yeah.
That's not interesting, and that's not what people want to connect with. I always tell folks that poetry at its core is like we all come to poetry looking for ourselves. Like, does somebody else feel like me? Mm-hmm. Has somebody else gone through this? Like, I want something that's going to squeeze my heart or something that's going to open my mind, right? Mm-hmm. And that's going to show me some part of myself that I can't access on my own. And that's how I've always went to poetry, to books and things like that. And that's what I try to honor in my own work, that I am my first audience. And so then I can't lie to myself and not be vulnerable to myself.
Yeah.
And so that's always shown up in my work since I was a little girl writing. I started writing to cope with a lot of weird stuff going on at home. Like my parents weren't documented when I was little. Their legal status changed, but there were a lot of people around me. You have the cousins that migrate here, and then you have a mixed status family. And so that there's a lot of, and then there's like alcoholism and all these like infidelity, like all these other big family dramas. And as a little kid, you're expected to keep everybody's secrets and all these things. So then I wrote them down, and I started writing when I was in the first grade, and I've been a writer ever since. And I just got, I never had a plan B. Mm-hmm. I was going to be a writer. And yeah, I worked other jobs all the time, and I had accepted that was going to be who I was, like the girl with the day job who writes furiously at night, and eventually I was going to write a book. I didn't know how that was going to happen, but I was just going full steam ahead.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, because you knew and you kind of had like that instinct to keep going, and that's it's crazy because there's times where those emotions kind of get knocked out by life. Like life just kind of beats it out of you, and it's hard to kind of reconnect to that moment again, And one thing again, you got to remember, everybody has a day job in one way or another.
Oh yeah,
and everybody's working late nights, if anything, to continue following that passion. And one day it just kind of the opportunity comes up and you're an author.
And I will say this, that sometimes when I go back and I read my work that I wrote when I was in the parking booth, like bored out of my mind, wishing that I could be somewhere else, or when I was at CVS fighting with all my coworkers and my customers, and oh my goodness, CVS, when people ask me how I have energy to fight people online, I'm like, well, I fought them every day at work, so I had to go somewhere and do it again. Yeah. But like, I wrote some of my best stuff in that time because all of that stifled, everything would come out. The only place I had to go was at my work. And so I talk to my manager all the time now that sometimes I feel like I use up my creativity in other things, right? Like when I'm on IG Live, like role-playing other characters for fun, just for my followers, or when I'm, for my mangoes. I don't like calling them followers because that makes me feel like I have a cult. And then like, or when I'm doing other things, right? And so it's like now it's just so spread out that writing sometimes, I don't save it for my writing. And then when I was working, my writing was so important. Like it's important to me now, it's my job, but the stakes were different.
Yeah.
My life depended on it.
Yeah, you were more in the survival mode, right?
Yes. And I don't miss that, but it feeds creativity really well.
Yeah. That's crazy because I have heard a few creatives say the same thing, that sometimes that those obstacles and those things that just get in your way sometimes are the ones that kind of keep pushing you forward to be more creative. And when you are in a comfortable position, it's easier to just kind of like feel like, I'll get back to it. I already got it,
I used to be a lot more prolific when I was there. I was like my circle of friends has always been predominantly poets. And my friends are always joking that I used to write 5 times more than like the regular person. But it was because I had to put it out somewhere. I had nowhere else to put it. And then now, luckily, good for my mental health that there's not that urgency anymore.
Right.
But sometimes my work, it's just like, girl, I'm here and you need to finish this book.
Like, what do you do for yourself? Like, what kind of gets you in that zone?
I really figured out, it took me a lot of trial and error, but I work really well in busy places that I could get lost in with like really great lighting. So I love coffee shops.
Yeah.
I'm not going to share the ones that I go to anymore because I keep burning my spots. But I love coffee shops that have a lot of sunlight. But I like I come from a big family, so like all the noise helps me. Mm-hmm. And then, but then I got to find a corner because I cry when I write. So I need to be able to like I can't have people staring at me. I used to go try to write in Echo Park and it didn't work because I kept running into people I know. And then they're like, are you okay?
But she's crying again.
Yeah, so I found what my routines are. It's kind of hard to keep them when you have a lot of like things going on, like, things like this or performances or other things. So it's a lot, but I feel like I'm falling into a rhythm that I'm figuring out and I'm working. So I'm closer to the book now than I was before because I really, I'll go sit at a coffee shop, turn off, put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and then
just
wrestle with a poem.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about the new book that you're writing? Like,
yes. So when I think I was 14, somebody gave me a number to a party line.
Oh my God, I remember those.
And then I called the party line. I went to Marshall, not John Marshall High School anymore because he was racist, but Marshall High School. I went to Marshall High School and I remember I was in the detention, the tardy sweep, and then they put you in a room. And then somebody handed me a number to a party line and I called this party line. And I remember when someone asked me to describe myself, I chose not to describe myself and I described a thin woman. For those of you listening that don't know what I look like, I'm a fat woman and I own it. And I worked a lot to love the body that I have now, but I didn't I was 14. Yeah. And in a world that always told you that being a gordita wasn't the right way to wear your body. And so I started catfishing. And I had been catfishing in one way or another up until my late 20s. And it took a lot of work for me to like end that and to deal with my body dysmorphia and to deal with the self-hatred I had like learned. And so I had gotten into a lot of relationships throughout the years with men that I was lying to, and it's this whole thing. And that's what the book is about. It's about what pushed me into wanting to abandon my body and pretend to have a different one, and what that was like, and how even though I lived in my body, there's still small ways that we all try to avoid loneliness on a regular basis. And so for me, it's been relationships that haven't served me, or it's been my own self and all these other things. So it's the search for learning to be your own best company.
Yeah.
And that's Mentirosa.
And how did you come to that conclusion on your own? Like, I mean, I'm sure it came with the heartbreaks and all that, like all those negative moments. But at what point did you decide, like, this is me, like, I'm going to embrace it and really, take a hold of it? Yeah,
I had started I used to share my poetry on a poetry forum, but I had a whole other life, a whole other Yesika, right? And my name on there was Yesika Star, so that's where my Instagram handle comes from.
Oh, okay.
And so Yesika Star was this thin Latina, but she was güerita, like this. She was someone I went to high school with. She knows. We've talked about it. But I had this picture of this other girl, and I was sharing my work, and people liked my work. And somebody found my real MySpace, and then I confessed to everybody because I didn't want to deal with the witch hunt. And in that process, I had made friends that did spoken word, and I had never even known spoken word was a thing. You don't grow up seeing that, and we didn't have keyboards. I didn't see the poetry jam. And so one of my friends from those forums told me about the poetry lounge here on Fairfax and Melrose. And I walked in one Tuesday and I never stopped going. And I would get up on the microphone every Tuesday and I made friends there who have become family. I've become part of the production team. But I think I would go to the poetry lounge and I would go home and catfish. And I remember thinking one day, I'm like, I'm denying all of these people that love me.
Yeah.
I'm denying my community. Like for the first time in my life, I had friends that saw me for who I was because they heard my poems, they saw my talent, but they also liked me and they thought that I was like this great person. I had never had so many people want to be my friends. And it just didn't make sense for me to keep doing it. And so I confessed to this one guy that I was talking to. And when he asked to see a real picture of me, that's when I realized that I had this level of hatred I hadn't kind of put my finger on, because I couldn't send him a picture of myself. Because I thought that what I had done wrong was not lie to him for all these months. I thought what I had done wrong was tricking him into falling in love with a fat woman. And I thought that was my sin. And so at the time I told somebody, and she's like, you know what, this is a lot for you to put on one person. You need therapy. Yeah. And so I got myself a therapist, and I was going to therapy, and I put in a lot of work in that year. It was, I think, my 20th. I was 28. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be 40 this year. So I just started doing all that work, and it took a while. It wasn't right away. And then then I started like spilling into my confidence, and I started being more present performing, and then, you know, a lot of other stuff later. Here we are.
No, that's awesome, because, you know, now you can walk into a room and you can feel that room just shift their attention to you, you know, and it's...
If you knew me and if you knew old Yesika, that is like Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing. It's like, yeah, like I'm always, you know, I'm always doing these things on my social media where I'm like, this happened X amount of years ago, or I accomplished this, and sometimes I worry that people are going to think that I'm like bragging all the time, but it's just, I can't believe this gets to be my life.
Yeah.
Because my life was so different just like 7 8 years ago. You know, and the fact that now somebody could say that I step into a room and I switch the energy in a room, that was like things that I would see my other poet friends do, and I'd be like, I'm never going to be able to do that. Yeah. But I was lucky that the Poetry Lounge has some of the best spoken word poets in the world, and I got to learn from them.
It's heavy, but it's a real human experience, you know, because we're all going, again, like I said earlier, we're all going through some sort of thing that we feel kind of sometimes lost in, you know, and until we hear a story or we see a post or something, you're like, dang, like that really shifts your perspective on things, you know, and sometimes it doesn't even have to be a huge thing, like, you know, like a mentor comes and tells you something, it legit can be an Instagram post.
Oh yeah.
You know?
It can be something really small that just rattles around in your head forever until it makes sense, and then your whole perspective changes out of nowhere. And so that's kind of why I share my work online the way that I do, because I remember being that girl on the bus going home from work and just feeling like my life is awful, you know, to be like, I'm at a dead end. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this job I hate. And I don't know when I'm going to make more than minimum wage. And I wish I could help my parents more. I wish I could do all these other things. And then just being so stuck, right? And then just scrolling and finding a poem that just puts you on fire in that moment, or just gives you permission to cry, or just gives you a language for something you don't know. And, you know, that's who I focus on. Like, that's who, when I think of who my readers are, it's the everyday person that is just like trying to make sense of their day every day. You know, and if you don't connect with that, that's fine. But that's what I think my job is.
Yeah. Do you feel like you keep your work and your personal life, I guess, still very close together, or do you prefer to keep that?
Oh, I'm messily keep it together. Yeah. I'm told that I should put more separation, but I've learned that privacy doesn't mean dishonesty. And sometimes I used to think that I had to tell my mingos, which is what I call anybody that's my reader or that follows me on social media, my manguitos. Yeah. But what I always, I felt like I owed them all the truth all the time, everything. And I've learned that some things I need to process before I share them with people. But I'm really big on just being an open book and being really vulnerable, and I speak about mistakes. I know that we're all human and we all make mistakes all the time, you know, and we learn, and sometimes we do them again, and we learn again, and we're all figuring it out. I never want anybody to think that I know everything or that I figured it out, and I think vulnerability is a superpower. Yeah,
no, it definitely is, and people can see right through it when you're not being honest either, you know, like, you know, I've said this before on the podcast, but there was a moment in my life in my late 20s where I had like this thing happen to me, and that I came to the conclusion, you know, like what's the movie that says like, you can't handle the truth?
Oh, yeah. I forgot what you're... Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, I came to that moment where I was like, man, maybe could I handle this truth, right? And then I came to the conclusion that I could, and what I need to do for myself now is continue on this path of being honest with myself, honest with those people around me, even if it meant sometimes not saying the right thing, but just being true. And that was like liberating to me. It felt like this weight off my conscious of myself, that I was like, you know what, I can move through this path a little bit like more weightless, if that makes sense, because I can be honest.
I always think that a success story, yeah, sure, it's great, right? But like nobody cares about the story once you've reached success.
Yeah.
People want to see the trajectory. They want to see it happen. Like Cardi B, right? When Cardi B, like now she's been famous for a while, so some people might forget. But we all saw her when she was in the projects and when she was coming up, and folks were like cheering her on, and like that sincerity, she's carried that into her career now, right? Like, I mean, we can all have our opinions about her or whatever, but she's still herself, and for better or for worse, right? And sometimes I wish I could be mysterious, right? I see some of my peers, some writers that are like really just keep to themselves, and nobody knows about their public life and stuff, and they're still very loved and respected, but that's just not who I am. And I could sit here and try to be that, but the minute you get in front of me and then I start oversharing, that's not the truth. So why not lean into it? There's room for all of us, right? Like somebody might not connect with somebody that doesn't want to be personal with their audience, and some other people might not connect with me because they just want the show me your poems and go. I don't want to hear about like whatever you're going through, right? But there's a little bit for everybody, and I feel like the people that are seeking somebody like me, acá estoy.
Yeah. The cool part is that when you think about like the audience, right? Your mangoes, and they're going there to see you, like it's crazy because they're showing up there because you made this impact, right? And I think that's so powerful because it's really rare when another person makes an impact on someone. Like you can have, your parents you look up to a certain extent, up at a certain point too. But to find somebody that you can be like, my God, this person really changed my life is like whoa. That's a lot for somebody to carry, especially if somebody who again, for me, you seem very down to earth. So like, being down to earth and hearing somebody say that, it's like, oh man, like, were those my intentions in the beginning? Like, my intentions were really just to kind of heal yourself, like heal myself, but everything else just kind of was a momentum that built up to it.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole with folks resonating with my story, I think it's so many times we get to see stories wrapped up neatly, right? And that's not what I do, and that's not what I am, and many times for example, if I'm performing at a conference, everything's really polished and organized, and the keynotes are written out and all of these things. But then a poet comes and all I have is my vulnerability, my honesty, and my humor, right? Because I'm also funny. I own it. But the sincerity that I have that most folks don't have, and I try to hold on to that as much as I can, because we live in LA, we live in Hollywood. There's polished people all the time. There's people that will give you any kind of performance that you want. So I know that the only thing that I can deliver is what I do really well, which is my tenderness, honesty, vulnerability. And I've tried to do what other people do, and it doesn't feel like it's mine.
Yeah.
So, and I hope that that's what people see in me and why they connect with that it gives them permission to be human.
Yeah.
And I always tell people that that's my job. My job is to come to a space and remind you that we're all people. And it's complicated and it's messy and there's a lot of feelings. And I'm just here to validate the messy mess that you are. And then somebody else will come and do something else for you. But this is what I do. And I try to stay in that.
Yeah. Now, is there anything that you've come across to this point in your, career that you still feel like you challenge, or it's challenging for you to write about? Like,
and there's so much. My manager's in the studio, and I looked over her she gave me the look like, keep telling you. There's so much, like, I really don't write. I talk about my working at these service jobs a lot in interviews, but I don't write about them. And I'm trying to figure out why that's the problem, right? And so, like, what a lot of people don't realize is that writing is a lot of wrestling with your demons.
Yeah.
Because especially when you're writing poetry, because if you're writing if you're writing fiction, you could manipulate the story for however you want, right? Yeah. And in nonfiction, it could kind of be as removed as you would want to be from it, right? Mm-hmm. But with poetry, you got to put. I don't know how to write it other than getting like elbow deep in it and rolling up my sleeves. So there's some things that I'm still working on with myself that I think I struggle with a little bit. And Tirosa, I'm addressing some things that I didn't realize I had kind of like not really written about, like a lot of my relationship with my dad. Since he passed away, I write a lot about and like honoring his memory, but I feel like I don't write a lot about like, I do write about the pain between us, but there's a lot that I purposely leave out because it's just so much to take on, and I'm challenging myself to kind of get into that a little bit, and also just telling the same story, but a little bit more honest every time you tell it.
Yeah.
You know, like I could write about an ex and how we broke up, and then the next poem will have, okay, so I wrote that one. So the next poem has to me taking some kind of accountability for how that was messy. And so let's do that. Okay, and the next one will be something like, how can we get a little bit more honest? How can we give the story a little bit more color and just keep being more sincere with what I'm saying? And that's how I try to grow as a writer. And also I read a lot and try to see what my peers are doing. And sometimes you see someone do something really cool with language and you're like, oh, and then it lights something else. And
that kind of inspires you to experiment.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of that, and also just having fun with my work too. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you could get a little too serious, especially when you're promoting it and you're speaking at schools and you're being treated like this important person. But you're like, really? Mm-hmm. I'm writing a poem about how I broke up with the same guy for the 10th time. Really? You guys are studying this here? Okay, let's talk about it.
Let's go.
Let's go.
You know, just to retrace a little bit here about what was I saying here? Your book, The Mentirosa one. So again, you've been kind of going down this process of untying like these or undoing these knots that just kind of built in your life, through this whole time.
Yes.
And it's like at the same time, you mentioned you went through therapy, in your late 20s, right? You said.
Yeah, in my late 20s. Yeah. My Saturn return kicked my butt.
Oh, you did? Oh, you didn't return.
It was so your Saturn return is when you're 27.
Oh.
And so around that time, right after I turned 27 was when everything just cracked open, like life cracked me open. Was like, you're going to figure out this mess now because you need to do some work. You got to get to work after this, because literally after I did all that therapy, all that work, that was, I forget the years, but in 2014, I made my first slam team. And 2015, I had poem go viral. And then my audience started getting built. And it was really maybe 4 years after I decided to start going to therapy. So it was all that self-work that I was doing. And I was showing up, because you can't show up on stage if you're hiding from your own self.
Yeah,
and so my stage presence had to grow. And then I was coached. And then one of my coaches, he was like, you sound like you're always apologizing. And I wanted to fight him. I was just like, what do you mean? And then he goes, you write these fierce poems, but you sound like you're apologizing on stage. And then so I had to go home and think about that. And it was a lot of that. It was a lot of realizations and being told about myself.
Yeah. See, and now I remember my whole point. Again, it's like these things that you're untying, finding out for yourself. It's funny because I had these similar revelations during the same time, like my late 20s, where I was like, dude, you got to get your stuff together. Like, you really got to focus on something and try to find your calling in a sense, and that takes a lot of work. It's going to break you down. It's going to build you back up. And I think once you learn the cycle of growth, and you're gonna have to keep deconstructing and constructing yourself back up plenty of times during your life.
Like, success isn't linear and neither is healing, right? We see that all over social media, but it's real. Like, if you think you're gonna work on one trauma, there's a bunch of others, and there's still more you're gonna deal with, and there's gonna come along the way. And so, I have to honor the person that I become, and also the times, right? Like what we're living, what's happening around us, and that also informs our writing and the stories we're choosing to tell. And so generally my goal is always to just show up the best person that I can. Not the best person that I can, because that sounds like I'm trying to be good. You know what I mean? And sometimes that's not what your work needs. I sometimes you need to hear a poem about how awful I feel sometimes, you know, and honoring that too.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mentirosa, I think it's some of the darkest things that I try to like not shine light on, because you know, the catfishing stuff, I tell it and it becomes like a scandalous story and people laugh because they've seen the show Catfish and things like that. I'm like, no, it was so sad that I thought I didn't deserve love and I had to go pretend to be somebody else. And that's sad, you know, and but also I have to take responsibility to the fact that I was willing to have borrowed love and to lie about it and manipulate these people and that part of myself that doesn't make its way into a lot of my work, and leaning into that. And then also being honest and holding up a mirror to my family and how that affected me not owning my body.
Yeah.
Both my mother and father, not just my father, you know, and me being a Catholic, growing up a Catholic. I'm no longer Catholic, but growing up Catholic and what that did to me, and just, you know, being a Latina in a Salvadoran family that has too many opinions about girls and their bodies. And I've addressed it in other books, but this book is dedicated, like there's a whole chapter dedicated to that, because I think it's important for folks. I think it's important for my readers that grow up as girls that grow up as girls to know they're not the only ones with that experience, because I think we internalize a lot of shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, I can only speak from my own experience as a male, you know, Hispanic guy. But, you know, I saw it with my sister. She was the only girl in my family. She went through a lot of hardcore stuff that I was like, guys, what are you guys doing? Like, it's
wild how people think and then even now as an adult, like, on Sunday, two of my tios came over and we had the great argument of 2024, because there's been drama all over. But two of my tios came. One of them is visiting from out of town. The other one drove up from Riverside. And they're in my house. And I'm the favorite sobrina, just so you know, I'm the favorite for them. And I come in and sit out in the living room to chat with them for a little bit. And then it just becomes this whole thing about how, like, I'm not being the ideal daughter and I'm not doing XYZ for my mom. And I'm sitting there, like, outraged, because for me, I'm finally providing. My mom's retired and I'm provide for her. And I'm like, how can you guys come and, like, say I'm not doing enough when I'm giving her everything I can?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to explain myself and they're cutting me off and they're doing that. So it triggered all of the younger me, where they would come and tell me that I wasn't a good, like, that I wasn't a good student, that I was whatever. And so, but then I was upset. And then I went back into who I am now. And I was like, with uncle like you, who needs enemies? And they were like, you know, but I share that to say that, like, all of this is constant happening, and the things that we heal, that we're working to heal from the past, they're always going to come back up and test us and do these things. And that's what I'm trying to what I'm wrestling with in this book, where it's like, in the other book, in Corazón, there's like, I tied it up with a ribbon, right? Like, I wanted so much love. I found it, but then I found it in myself. And then they're like, yes. And then in Tesoro is like, yeah, I dealt with all this machismo, but now I'm a powerful woman. Yes. And then in Hermosa, I was like, I'm a powerful woman. Yes. And so now I'm just like, what if I just want to write a messy book?
Mm-hmm.
And of that sometimes you're just a mentirosa, you know? And so that's where I'm at now. I don't know if it's going to change. I've learned to not promise that my books are going to be something, because sometimes the books are like, nah, girl, you got it wrong. This is what we're going to be. So, but that's kind of the direction that it's taking right now.
No, it's again, it reminds me of, I've said this again plenty of times, the whole hero's journey. And like, that to me is like the definition of what, a successful story, of a person, right? Like, you start off arrogant, like you start talking about, or you start figuring out self-love, then you start having like these down moments where you're doubting yourself and like you're just complete in the bottom. But then you start coming to these moments of self-realization. You start growing self-acceptance, seeking these answers of things that traumatize you as a kid, and allowing yourself to kind of come to terms with it. I've had conversations with my parents too about things that they used to do when I was a lot younger. We used to, I'm sure like most common Latino households, you get hit. I'll get hit with the cable de la aspiradora, ganchos, like heels. Like, I grew up, in that kind of environment. for the most part, you know. And, you know, and I had to grow up, and eventually I had this conversation with my parents. I was like, why'd you guys do that? You know, and you understand, you can't really fully forgive, but you can at least understand where this was coming from. And they were undocumented at the time as well. The stresses of work, the stresses of just having to survive and all this stuff. I get it. You know, it's overwhelming. You let anger control you, and it leads you to these things that, you know, I'm a parent, so I've been in situations like, I don't have my kid, you know, but I've had these moments where I'm so frustrated, and after I'm done with the frustration, I feel like crap.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like, why did I do this, you know? And I can only imagine that feeling after my parents will whoop us, how they will feel after seeing us, and, you know, this. And me growing up, I had this conversation with them. They came to this conclusion that was not the best, you know, way to go about things. But again, I can't fully forgive them for what happened, because it hurt at the time. You know, it was really painful and traumatic for a long time. But at some point, you at least come to terms with, like, you know, yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't even know the conclusion to that.
I feel like we learn to humanize our parents, right?
Yeah.
We grow up thinking of them like, you're a parent. You're supposed to have it all right, and you're supposed to figure it out. For me, it was I had a lot of resentment towards my dad, even once he passed away, because I was like, if he had just quit drinking, he would still be here. Yeah. You know, if he had just all these things and all this things that I blame myself for, and then I hated him for it. And it was but my dad was also my greatest love. So it was a very complicated relationship that I had. And one of my cousins told me once, she's like, this country broke your dad. And then as I've gotten older and gone back to El Salvador and asked questions and talked with my tia and my grandma and I have half-sisters and talked to them, and kind of piecing the story of who my dad was beyond the man that I knew him as my father, gave context to me. You know, like, the Civil War made him leave El Salvador, and he was a college student over there from a family that did well in their pueblo, right? Like, so he knew a comfortable life, and then he had to come here to be what people would be like, an undocumented person, like, working service jobs, right? That for him he felt were beneath him, because back home he was the golden grandson.
Yeah.
You know, and not that it doesn't excuse his behavior, but now I understand it. I understand that it wasn't about me ever. And so that doesn't remove the pain and the trauma and all the stuff that I have to still navigate, because it's showing up in my relationships with men. It shows up. But it allows me to give my dad a little bit of grace, you know, and to be like, he was, I know that he loved me the best he could, and he couldn't do much better than he did, you know. And I have my mom now, and sometimes I'm like, oh, esa señora, she's on her stuff, you know, and she's doing these things, but I also know that she's trying the best that she can, and sometimes I get upset because she doesn't go to, like, my events, or she passes on it, you know, and she's like, no, mija, like, you go, I'm fine. And it hurts, you know, because, like, my best friend's mom comes, and then I'm like, how does this lady that's not related to me, she's here, but my mom isn't? But then I also think about her trauma and how she wasn't allowed to go to school after 3rd grade because her brothers didn't want to go to school. And then she was raised just working and being of service to people. And then she was married to a man that was an alcoholic that would tell her that she was not smart because she didn't go to school. And so my mom doesn't think books and poetry are for her, and it's not. But I got lucky. I was in El Salvador on tour, and she was there at the same time. I had sent her to go on vacation, and she went to go see me perform in Spanish. So I'll take that. Yeah. If she doesn't go to anything again, she went to that, and she was able to see me do my thing. I was performing in the middle of a mall in El Salvador at Plaza Mundo, and, like, it was a really big fancy thing, and so she got to see me flex a little.
She was like, that's my daughter.
Yeah, that's my daughter. And, you know, now she kind of, like, she'll listen to me when I tell her things. And because right now my whole thing is just like, Mom, one day I'm going to, like, this next book advance, it's going to be like blah, blah, blah. And then I'm, like, telling her, like, what my agents might be thinking. And she's like, it all sounds make-believe to her. So I'm like, wait. Let's see what the check looks like. And then she'll believe me. Numbers don't lie.
Yeah, she's like, whoa.
Yeah, when I was like, look, Mom, look at the comma.
Man, the parents are a trip. I mean, you know, you're going to grow up, and you're going to come to these conclusions on your own too, you know, sooner or later. And then again, it's just a matter of being patient and really trying to I guess you could be forgiving, to an extent.
Absolutely. And then I am a tia to my sister. Oh my God, I might have a third one now because my youngest is just about to be a mom.
Nice.
But I'm the oldest. So Jennifer after me is the mother of 2 kids, a 13-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy. And then my youngest sister is going to have a little girl soon. But just seeing my mom, how she's present for my niece and my nephew, I'm like, this is like a healing kind of thing, And also she gets to be present because before when she was raising us, she was working all day, taking an hour-and-a-half bus to Pacific Palisades, coming home, and then didn't know if her husband was going to be drunk and ready to fight. Yeah. And then she had 3 daughters that have been fighting themselves all day, that were hungry and waiting and they forgot to take the chicken out of the fridge or didn't clean up after themselves. So, like, I can't imagine how exhausted she was, And then now, sometimes I'm like, man, she gives these kids things she didn't give us. But I'm like, yeah, because now she can.
Exactly.
Because now her only role is grandma, is not wife, mom, housekeeper, da-da-da-da-da. And so, she's spoiling the hell out of these kids, and so am I. So hopefully they grow up to be well-adjusted human beings.
Yeah, of course. And that kind of serves as a way of healing for them as well, Yes. I've seen it. I recently, April 20th, my little son was born.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's been a hectic month. Just baby stuff.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah,
you're in it right now.
I'm deep in the trenches. But going to the whole thing is just like you see this way as a healing for them because again, like you said it perfectly. Like they weren't necessarily present during that time. Again, they were survival mode. They were just trying to make sure that we were fed, that everything was organized as much as possible, and now they can really kind of just take in the fruits of that labor that they had, whether it was labor for them or not, like whether they see it or not, it's they get to see their grandkids.
Yeah, and like to think too, like to be a kid, you don't know, and you get mad because your parents take to buy you your clothes at the swap meet, and then because you're funny story. I worked with Adidas a couple of years ago, and we kept writing. My manager and I kept writing Adidas back and forth to each other, but we kept feeling that it looked weird. And then we came to the conclusion that it's because we would only wear the chafa stuff, like the one where it was spelled differently. And that's the Adidas we recognize, not the real one. And so like, that's kind of what it was. But those were things that I was sending my parents for in high school, to be like, damn, like these kids have Jordans and stuff. Yeah. And then here I am with my dusty Vans and stuff. But now that I think when I'm early, I'm like, I was lucky to even have Vans.
Yeah.
That my mom was like going to give us one good pair of shoes to the 3 of us for like the semester or the school year or whatever. And then I look at my niece and I'm like, you don't know what it's like. Like she has, if her mom doesn't buy, she's like, Tia Yesika, I want these Crocs. And then I iba la tia, to get them for her. But it's the joys. It's how you heal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a perfect thing with that. Perfect thing to say, just that healing, it's going to come in all sorts of forms and shapes and sizes as well. So, well, thank you for sharing your story with me.
Of course. No, thank you for having me. It's been an hour already?
Yeah, we're getting close to the time.
We've been talking.
So is there like a specific time frame of when people can expect that 4th book?
So this is going to be a very different process than any of my other process. My 3-book, third trilogy, I had the honor of being published by an independent publisher called Not a Cult, which is local to LA, and it's been a really beautiful relationship. But the publishing world, which is a whole other podcast, right? It's really big and complicated. And I have agents now. So now with this book that's gonna release, you get ready to publish, you send it to a bunch of publishers, and then hopefully it becomes a bidding thing and somebody tries to give you a lot of money for it or some money for it or something, right? And so there's still a whole process for that, and
okay. And
so hopefully maybe end of 2025, but that's me being hopeful. But it's coming. And in the meantime, I'm always sharing stuff on my social media and I'm always up to something.
Yeah. Let's go. And we want to touch, before we end it, I want to touch base on this thing that when I first saw your performance at Art Space, you mentioned something about like just, to me, it sounded like a recipe for air quote success in terms of kind of just growing your audience, kind of, growing yourself as a creative or as a creator. And it was kind of like showing up to events, kind of like allowing yourself to connect to people.
Yes.
And I remember just like listening to that, and I was like, this is it. Like, this is what, people were like, oh, I want to go viral. People, I want to do this, But it's like, it doesn't work that way all the time,
Going viral does nothing for you if you don't have a foundation.
Yeah.
I've had peers, poets that have had poems do 1 million views, and they're not getting booked, right? Like, the viral is great, but there has to be something else, right? And for me, I had luckily my work was going up on videos 2015 when it was like kind of new to see spoken word online, and so it would get picked up by everybody, like Huffington Post, all these other things. And in eso, like in that period of time in 2016, I came to Boyle Heights to La Concha when there was a collective called Confuerza Collective, and they were having an open mic. And I wanted to connect with more Latinos because the Poetry Lounge, my beloved community, is a predominantly Black community who have allowed me in with open arms. But I was like, where's the Latino poets, right? Like I want to get a little bit closer to my culture. Anyway, so I came to Boyle Heights, and I was performing one of my poems, and then like this light kind of came on where the audience recognized who I was, and I recognized my audience.
Mm-hmm.
I said a poem, and then I said something in Spanish that nobody had ever laughed to, and the whole room laughed. And when I wrote it, I meant it to be funny. But nobody had ever laughed because I was doing it to like English-speaking rooms.
Yeah.
And then I realized I found my community, and then I became friends with Gloria and Elgona Positivity Pride, and then Alma, who's also a brilliant poet. And they invited me to go to Pantapalooza, which was an event at La Concha. And then I ended up forming a poetry collective with Angela Aguirre called Chingona Fire. And then we had our first event at La Concha, at the old La Concha, when the Ovarians used to run it. And long story short, I built a community that like really, really was doing a lot of stuff, but reciprocated like my affection for them.
Yeah. And
through that, I ended up getting a couple of my first interviews on publications and making other friends, collaborating with people like Nalgona Positivity Pride, and I are still like great friends and always, trying to cook something up. And Boyle Heights has become a second home of sorts.
Yeah.
I don't want to add to the gentrification. I'm not going to be like, there's my home. But it's kind of where I found a community of artists, and I'm really lucky that they allowed me to come in. And then like Espacio, shout out to Nico and Myra, who are my heart,
Espacio 1830. Right.
Anytime I'm like, hey, can I come and do this? They're like, yeah, this is your home. And then I'm like, don't tell me that porque me aprovecho,
Yeah.
But Boyle Heights is really pivotal for me finding my voice and my community.
Yeah, no, well, again, I walked out of that event with that in mind, and it's kind of still resonated with me, among other conversations I've had with other people who, in one way or another have said the similar thing. And I feel like, since my journey with knowing that and applying it, you start seeing how that at the end of the day is going to carry, more value to your community and to yourself. And that's what's going to take you, places.
I'm of service to my community.
Yeah.
It's not transactional. I'm of service to the community, and I just grew up. I think it's just, I grew up in that. I grew up helping at church and stuff like that. And so I've always sought community that like holds you.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been very, very lucky that I found that like through poetry and through just the artist community, and out here or on Fairfax and Melrose where the Poetry Lounge is at and all that. And yeah, I've been very, like I always say that my success is really dependent on the people that were around me and pushed me and raised me up. And no one gets to something by themselves.
Yeah.
And I feel like I still have a long way to go, and I'm still grateful that people are rocking with me and excited to see what's on the horizon because,
yes.
And like, what was it? My friend JP Sachs released an album, and he took one of my poems and turned it into a song on his album. And I got my first royalty check for it, right? And so I didn't think anybody was going to care, but I wanted to document it on my social media so that I could like see it again and, when it comes up again.
Yeah.
But like to see everybody so excited for me, they don't even know what I did or what the check was like, but they're just excited.
Yeah, for your achievements, for your success.
And it feels so beautiful that people care,
yeah.
And so I care back. And that's kind of, I always say that I have a relationship with my audience. It's not just one way.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
I know it's
Yeah.
Sometimes we fight, but it happens.
Yesika, thank you so much for taking
Thank
the time
you.
to join me. For people to find you online or anything just up to date with your work, where can they find you?
You can always find me on social media under Yesika Star, YesikaStarr, or at my website, YesikaSalgado.com, and you can get my books anywhere books are sold, but I prefer you go to independent bookstores and support them, please.
You heard it here first, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in.
you.
We'll catch you guys next week. And once again, you're listening to KQBHLP, Los Angeles, California, 101.5 FM. And we will see you next week. We're going to sign off with some music by Johnny Cisneros with their song Motions. And here we go.